Hello, my name's Andy and welcome to episode 3 of Keeping Water. In this episode we're going to look at my pond and garden as they are today. There is some water amongst all those plants. I'll tell you later on why I've let them somewhat overgrow this year. On the right side of what remains of the garden we have some raised beds, a mini greenhouse, a water butt and a planter. During lockdown we've got a few tidying up jobs completed around the garden, including replacing the wood chip with gravel, moving the remaining wood chip to the tree area, tidying up and cleaning the patio, and for some reason making a cat tree house from offcuts. Anyway, in spite of being somewhat overgrown, the pond and fish are doing well, and I've only made a few small changes this year. The first was to finish off the return from the skimmer, which I had left in a somewhat temporary state at the end of last year. I continued the rustic wall and fixed the outlet within it. I added a loosely fitted right angle which allowed me to adjust both the height and direction of the flow. The next change happened due to the intrusion of a third party. I'd noticed that some plants were not grown as well as normal and looked a little flattened. One morning I looked out into the garden and saw the somewhat inevitable heron standing amongst the marginal baskets. This was the first time I'd seen one in the garden, let alone in the pond. I therefore put up some netting as a fence preventing herons from getting to the pond. Aside from the marginal shelf, there's no part of the pond shallow enough for the herons to fish from, so if they can't access these areas, it should stop them from getting the fish. I also decided this year to let the plants grow wild, merging into the netting and creating a solid barrier against the herons. So far it's worked. It's not pretty or sophisticated, but better than a net over the pond, and a good balance between risk management and aesthetics. This part was originally installed to prevent these wild creatures from making friends with the fish. The netting carries on around the pond and attaches to the other end of the shed. The next addition was a CCTV camera. I bought this initially as an added protection against the herons, allowing me to keep an eye out while I'm either too lazy to get up or not at home. However, it's been more useful, as the herons have been notable by their absence, as a means of watching the fish's behaviour and activity when they're not aware they're being watched. It's been quite revealing. The fish, as I'll come to later, are nervous, so to see what they get up to when relaxed has been really interesting and reassuring. They're quite active and cover the whole pond, not just the part near the shadowy safe area under the plants. They tend to be drawn to the sunny areas, only retreating when something spooks them, usually one of us going out into the garden. It's also shown that the fish are active at night, especially the rudd, and often can be seen trying and succeeding to catch insects from the surface. The next addition was a shallow water pump. It's made my twice weekly filter clean and water change process much easier, and aside from a sometimes temperamental float switch, works really well. A future video, probably episode 5, will focus on how I clean the filter and complete water changes. I realise that during these videos I've not really shared some facts and figures about the pond, how big it is, water volume and so forth, so let's put that right now. At the moment, with the plant growth at its peak, the pond actually looks quite small. It's one of the reasons I usually cut them back. The pond is an irregular kidney bowl shape, but at its longest point it's about 16 feet. From this CCTV image, the edge of the pond to the right is actually out of shot and under the overhanging plants. At its widest point, the pond is 9 foot wide. Again, this image doesn't quite show the full width. The skimmer, for instance, is just out of shot at the top. As for depth, the pond is roughly split into two halves. To the left it is about 3.5 foot deep. To the right, about 4 foot. The volume of the pond is just under 11,000 litres. This was calculated by timing how long it took to fill a 60 litre tub, then timing how long it took to fill the pond, and then doing some maths. There's obviously some margin for error there, but it will do for now. Now to take a look at the filtration. The system is fed by a pump placed here. It is a Pondtech Pondomax Eco 11000. Flexible pressure hose at the bottom of the pond takes the water from the pump, following the curve of the pond wall, up a vertical rigid pipe and exits the pond here. Then buried under the earth of the planted area, it enters the shed. It then runs behind the multi-bay and then up and into the UV. Before descending and into the multi-bay, during which it flows through the vortex, the brushes, the K1 and the Japanese matting. It then exits the multi-bay, drops down, runs through the shed and out to the pond. It runs buried within the planted area before returning to the pond here. Now, as I've said, the pump is an 11,000 litre an hour pump. However, I don't get that rate of turnover. Firstly, there's the head height. From the bottom of the pond to the UV is about 7 foot, which will obviously lower the flow rate. Secondly, as the water enters the filter through a 1.5 inch pipe and exits by gravity through a 1.5 inch pipe, it overflows if water enters the system too quickly. Unfortunately, it's not a variable flow pump, so to reduce the flow into the system, I've added a splitter. Due to a lack of space in the filter house, I placed this in the pond. The tap to the left is fully open and sends water to the filter. The tap to the right is only partially open and sends water around the pond. This is obviously not a great solution, as it adds plastic into the pond for the fish to rub against. I would prefer to have a variable flow pump, but as the pump I have has worked really well for me over 5 years, I can't justify the expense of replacing it. As I mentioned, just out of shot, I also have a skimmer, which is positioned here. It is driven by a J-Bow XTP 10,000 pump, which does a pretty good job of creating a good flow through the system. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that the pipework is buried in a trench around the pond and returns the water back to the pond, here. With the current filtration sort of covered, I'll now move on to the fish, starting with the rudd. I have 14 rudd in the pond, all around 5 to 6 inches. There are 9 golden ones and 5 silver. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that these were fried from the 5 original rudd that I stocked the pond with. These rudd spawned in 2016, and around 30 of their fry survived and grew to around 2 inches. They survived on benign neglect really. I didn't add any fry food into the pond and they got by on algae and other plant matter and insect life. Again, if you've watched episode 2 of Keeping Water, you'll know that in 2018 the beast from the east hit my pond quite badly, and as a result over half the fry died. The remaining 14 were returned to the pond later in 2018, and since then they've tripled in size. This is again in spite of my somewhat benign neglect. I rarely put food in just for them. They nibble mostly unsuccessfully at the carp 6 and 11mm pellets, yet mostly ignore smaller 2mm pellets I put in just for them. I occasionally put in bloodworms, which they enjoy, and garden worms, which they really enjoy. I think, like their parents, they'll have a growth spurt once they're big enough to more easily eat the carp pellets, and, like their parents, this will probably coincide with them becoming bigger and more mature enough to spawn. I've got 3 tench, 2 female and 1 male. I bought my first tench in June 2016 when it was about 6 inches long. It disappeared for 6 weeks after being put in the pond, not even visible on the GoPro, before reappearing and then pretty much thinking it's the boss of the pond since. It was the largest fish to survive the beast from the east and has continued to eat well and grow consistently since. When last measured, in September 2019, it was about 16 inches long and looks now to be around 18 inches. She has mostly eaten sinking pellets and plant matter. However, in the last 2 years she has also begun eating the 6mm and 11mm carp pellets from the surface. I bought the other 2 tench in January 2019 when they were also around 6 inches long. One was a male and 1 female. I deliberately ordered a pair as this gave the possibility of spawning between the 3 tench at some point in the future. Having said that, I did no research into how common it is that tench breed in garden ponds. However, as it's simple to differentiate between male and female tench, it seems an easy decision. You can tell males apart from females by their larger, spoon-like pelvic fins, and also the development of pronounced muscles just above their pelvic fins. As I documented in episode 2, I bought my 2 carp in November 2018 at quite a large size, 19 inches and 20 inches for the mirror and common respectively. Both carp are quite skittish and in spite of their large size can disappear into the pond. This is probably indicative of their heritage. They've not been grown and sold as decorative fish, and maybe this is why they're more instinctively nervous than koi carp. I'm not overly bothered by this. I think it makes them safer from predators, but I would like them to get used to me at feeding times and be a little less easily spooked. One of the benefits of the CCTV camera I installed is that I can see how they behave and act when no one's out in the garden, and it was heartening to see that they were very active and cruised around all areas of the pond looking for food and enjoying the sun. Since they've been in the pond, they've not only grown length and width, but have also developed dark, rich colours and are basically scale perfect. Aside from the parasite infection in early 2019, they've appeared in robust health. When last measured in September 2019, they had grown to 23 and 22 inches, the common still being slightly bigger. We'll see this autumn how much bigger they've got. They've shown no signs of spawning behaviour and appear to be similar body shapes, which could suggest they're both the same sex. Unfortunately, it's not as easy to differentiate carp as it is tench, so only time will tell. I'm not planning on buying any more fish for the pond. I think the stocking level is fine for the pond size and the filtration. However, the fish are only going to get bigger and the rudd, at least, will probably spawn. What fish I have in a few years' time will be dictated by the water quality. If the filtration can cope with the fish as they grow larger and or produce offspring, then I'll not move any on. I hope I can maintain the water quality over time, as this will allow the fish to remain healthy as they develop. However, it is likely that I need to develop my filtration to achieve this. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water. I really do appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you're not already, and add comments and ask questions if you like. In next week's episode of Keeping Water, episode 4, I'll describe in more detail the plans I have to improve the pond over the next 12 months. Things are going well, but there's still improvements to make. I'll see you then.